now read this will be the 9th week in a row. We are in week 9 of the 10 Commandments, and so today we are moving through them again, and I invite you to follow along, and you'll see in bold the text that will be the focus of the day. Every time I read this, by the way, even though I've read it many times, I see something new. Look for something new where God's speaking to you this morning. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or wife or male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So today we're going to talk about lying, and I swear, for every single commandment, this is what happens to me every week. I go, okay, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not do this. And I'm like, how do you preach a sermon on that? Like, it's so obvious, right? Or I just don't do it. That's like the simple answer, right? But I think like all other commandments, quickly we're going to find with lying that it's a complex issue that really forces us to reckon with it a little bit. I asked you, would you lie to save someone's life potentially? And almost universally, everyone said yes. And so right there, you just said it's okay sometimes to break the 10 Commandments. That's fascinating, right? I mean, just that alone should give us some pause to think really carefully about the purpose of the commandments and how they function in our lives on a day-to-day basis. The most regular thing that I lie about is whenever someone asks, do these clothes make me look skinny? Or anything like that. Actually, I'm the one who asked my wife that in our relationship. But anyway, you know what I mean? Like, when do you lie when it's a good thing, and how do you do that, and when is a good idea? Here's a couple just things to think about. I don't know if you've ever considered this, but for a long time in church history, you weren't allowed to support acting or even jokes because all acting is based on a lie. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, because you say things that aren't true. There's also different kinds of lies. For example, in the Bible, Rahab is universally praised. She was a prostitute in Jericho who lied to the people in order to help the Israelites. And so she's praised as someone who not only lied, but helped save the Jewish people. And so there's your Old Testament version of Corrie ten Boom, who saved some of the Jewish folks. All parents sometimes lie to their children when you tell them that it's going to be okay, but deep in your heart, you're not exactly sure if it's going to be okay. It gets more complicated than that really fast because there are some sorts of lies that are actually meant to be harmful and to destroy people, like certain forms of gossip or where you're hurting someone's reputation. Just this last month, I was watching TV on and off, and there'd be all these commercials with political ads, right? If half the things were true in those political ads, the end of the world would have already happened this week, right? I mean, it's just a true statement. That, if what they're saying is true, why didn't it happen the day after whoever or not was elected? It's crazy how much we exaggerate or build up. Exaggeration is another form of lying, but it's not 100% lying. So how does that rule into the equation? I'm not sure if maybe, though, the elections just didn't work in our case, because in Florida, we're national news for having our votes not count, right? Who knows how that'll work out in the next few days. So there's exaggeration. If you want to see a pastor lie, just ask them how many people go to their church. They will exaggerate, and so all pastors are guilty of lying. Another form of lying is just straight up denial. Like maybe something is true, but they can't see it or won't see it. And so they say denial's not just a river in Egypt. Denial is another way that we lie to ourselves or lie to God. I'll stop with this one, but I remember one time I was Another form of lying is just error or omission. And so I remember one time I had to do some deposition for something, and the lawyer was coaching me and saying, hey, whenever they ask about this, never say no, just say I can't recall. Just say I can't recall. Because if you say no and they prove you wrong, then you're guilty or you're perjuring yourself in some way. But if you just say you can't recall, then you can change your mind later. We have all these legal loopholes to make sure that we don't get caught with this stuff, right? And so when it comes to lying, it's a very complex situation. We have good times to lie and bad times to lie. Sometimes we're protecting people. Sometimes we do it to hurt people. And it can get really messy really fast. T.S. Eliot, who is a brilliant writer, he said, the truth is often we lie because the truth is too much of a burden for us to bear. Often we lie because the truth is too much of a burden for us to bear. What we're going to talk about a little bit in this message is one of the reasons and primary causes for why we lie or we live in a world of lies is because dealing with the truth is often very difficult. And we often are creative in how we find ways to avoid it as much as possible. But I just want to remind you of two things from the scriptures to kind of guide this message today. The first one is this. In Genesis chapter 3, at the very beginning of the Bible, right after God creates the heavens and the earth, there's the 7 days, and then he makes Adam and Eve, and then he rests. What happens next? What happens next is God says, hey, don't eat from that tree. And they go, okay, got it, God, no big deal. There's tons of other food. We're totally happy. Everything's good to go around here. But then the serpent finds Eve while she's alone. And he says, hey, you should eat from that tree. And she goes, no, God said that if we eat from that tree, we shall surely die. And do you know what the serpent says next? It's the very first lie in the history of the world. The first lie is this, is the serpent says in Genesis 3:4, you will surely not die. You will surely not die. Crazy thing to think about, that the entire fall of humanity and everything that happens in the Bible after Genesis 3 is all built on a lie. All the cause of one simple, small lie that the devil planted in someone's ear to guide them away from the truth. Lying might actually be a bigger deal than we think about. When Jesus was confronting some of the Pharisees in the New Testament, he was interacting with people, even though they were religious leaders. He viewed them as evil people because they were truly leading people away from God. It's one of the reasons why you as church folks should know, don't just trust what a pastor says. Test whether or not it's true with the scriptures and true with the Holy Spirit. And Jesus finds these religious leaders, and in John 8:44 he says this, you guys, you belong to the Father. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, the devil, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of all lies. It's interesting that when Jesus talks about the devil, he primarily refers to him as a liar. It's interesting to think about, I think, that when we think of the sin and brokenness in the world, so much of it might just be rooted in something that's not true. Jesus is what? The way, the truth, and the life. If we're truly following God, then the concept of truth is something that we should pursue and take very seriously, and that lying might actually be something that is more serious than we could ever imagine. So here's what I want to do today. I want to talk about why this commandment exists. Then I'm going to talk about a guardrail, why God gave us this commandment to help us from falling astray, and then we'll end with just 3 simple lies that I think we often tell ourselves. So let's start like we always do with this series and talk about the vision. God always gives a commandment, but it's not just interested in the disobedient part, he's interested in the good part. When God says don't commit adultery, he says don't commit adultery, but what he really means is invest in a good relationship and be faithful. When God says do not steal, he doesn't mean just do not steal, he really means be generous. Every time there's a commandment, Jesus flips it around in the New Testament and says it's not just about the law, it's about your heart and doing something good with it. And so what's the good thing that comes out of that commandment? Do not lie, or do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Let's talk about what God envisions for us in this commandment. One of my favorite movies is A Few Good Men. I used to watch it when I was growing up. Has anyone seen that movie? It's got a lot of famous people in it, but there's this really big scene in A Few Good Men where Tom Cruise is like a lawyer, and he's going after, is it Jack Nicholson, I think? Yeah, I always confuse Jack Nicklaus and Nicholson, but I shouldn't. Jack Nicholson is sitting there, and he's a general, and there's this really powerful moment where he's like, give me the truth, give me the truth, give me the truth. And then the famous line is what? You want the truth? You can't handle the truth. You know, and then he goes off on this monologue saying, hey, you want the truth, but you don't stand where I am. You don't have to, defend, Jewish folks in your basement or stand on the front lines with guns. So the truth is often a very difficult thing. When Jesus said he's the way, the truth, and the life, what's fascinating about that to me is there's no disconnect between the way, i.e. how you live your life, and truth. If you're in truth, you have life. And if you have lie, you have death. And there's a deep connection there. I was listening the other day to a podcast talking about artificial intelligence. And I don't know if this is an exciting thing or a not exciting thing, but it was Elon Musk who was describing a future where, imagine this. Imagine you and I are like half human and half machine, and you're like tied into the internet somehow. Your brain is tied into the internet. And you know how like in Google right now, you can Google anything you want and like all this stuff shows up, right? Well, imagine a day if your brain was like that. Imagine a day where you personally, your brain was the same thing as the internet, except you had just billions and billions. I don't even know. That's too small a number. Trillions and trillions is too small a number. But basically at every moment of every day, you had infinite access in your brain to every single true thing in the entire world at all times. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? To know everything. You couldn't hide anything. You would know everything that's true. And you would know everything that's not true. You would know everything. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? It's literally terrifying to us, isn't it? It's terrifying to think of what would happen if you actually knew everything and there was no more lying anymore, because everything was just the way it is and you had to deal with it the way it was. It's crazy to think that God already has that. God already knows everything in all places and at all times. And he doesn't go crazy. It's possible to know everything, to know the truth, and to really be bringing the world into an even more true reality. You and I are often afraid of truth, but it might be the best thing for us. When I was in summer camp one time, not summer camp, I was working at a Christian camp one time. They had a bunch of Bible verses that they had all of us memorize so that when we get there, we're prepared to deal with the blunt of like all this labor and difficulty. And one of the verses that we all had to memorize as we were going there to serve for a month or so was Ephesians 4:29, and it says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth or lies. Do not let any lies come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." So don't say anything unhelpful to other people, but only what is beneficial for building them up so that they can get better and grow stronger. Picture this. What if every day, all day long, all we did was speak the truth? And not just the truth, good words. One of the things that's amazing to me about God is that when I tell my daughter when she's going to bed at night, "Hey, love, you are so amazing and so smart and so beautiful." Like I say these things all the time to her, very intentional, because I know she's going to be surrounded by a culture where she's going to feel small. And so every night and every single day, everywhere we're driving, I always say, "Grace, you are so beautiful. Grace, you are so smart and special." And even though, well, I know she's got a low IQ, and she doesn't know. I'm just teasing. I don't know that. But the point is this. I'm saying all these things to her, and I'm trying to build her up, but I don't know if it's true or not. And here's what's crazy. Because I don't know if things are going to be okay 20 years from now. I don't know the future. Only God does. But if God knows everything, and God only speaks what's true, that makes the promises that he's given us even more astounding. So that when he says everything's going to be okay, that's a really big deal because he's speaking the truth. When he says that you and I are made in his image and he's willing to die for us, that's a big deal because he knows everything and only speaks the truth. The promises that God gives us are so big and astounding, they're so big I could never make them. They're too big for me. But imagine a world where you and I were able to tell other people God's promises to one another so that we were building one another up all the time. If you go on YouTube comments or Reddit comments on the internet and someone posts something, everything underneath it is negative. The church should be a place. This is the vision. The church should be a place where our words are building people up every day. But those words aren't fake words. They're not like, "Hey, you got this. Hey, you're going to be okay. Yeah. Like, we're not cheerleaders in a church. Sometimes we're kind of like cheerleaders. But what we should be to one another is truth tellers. We should be telling the truth to one another because we believe that the truth is what actually is a good thing. And that's way harder than just speaking lies about how everything's going to be okay. In the Old Testament, over and over, whenever a prophet would show up, what would they do? They would say something that's tough to hear. "Hey, if you don't change your ways, this is going to happen. Hey, if you keep going down that road, you might want to think twice because this is going to happen." The prophets came and they spoke the truth, and it was always difficult. But it was always good, because the truth was what was going to enable them to change so that they could avoid destruction and disaster. Whenever we speak truth to one another, what it does is it allows us the opportunity to grow and to avoid destruction. It's really hard when we do that passing of the peace here at church on Sunday morning to ever speak truth into one another's life because we don't know one another. A church is supposed to be a place where you know people well enough and have built up enough trust so that it can be a truth-telling community. Right now, we're just a nothing-telling community because we kind of barely know one another. We're not sure if we know other people. Many relationships and marriages are the same way too, where it's mainly just silent and you never talk about the hard stuff. But God designed us to be truth-tellers. And not like in an awkward way, and not in a terrible way, but in a loving way so that we can all grow and get better. A place where there's truth is also a place where you're not afraid to wrestle with difficult ideas. In a truth-telling community, it's okay to ask questions because you're not afraid of the truth. You know, a lot of communities I've heard of before, you know, there'd be like this issue, this elephant in the room that nobody talks about, because everyone's afraid to say what's really true because they're afraid that once you say it, well, then everyone's going to have a disaster and a freak-out moment. And it's true that if you don't tell the truth in the right way, it can hurt. But if you deny the truth, if you don't talk about that thing, all it does is grow and grow and grow to a point where you can no longer deal with it anymore. One of the most challenging and difficult things that you're invited to as a Christ follower is to be courageous enough to speak the truth. That's a hard thing to do. Obviously, do not lie, but do not lie is like a super low bar. Do not lie is a super low bar. You know, you can see, you just get a really good attorney and they'll give you the right words to make sure you never get in trouble. But what would it mean if you told the truth? What would it mean if we were a community of people that were actively moving closer to what was true? That's what the church is called to be a part of. Now, let's talk about the guardrail piece. Do not lie also is there for a reason. And it's because God knows that we're tempted to do it all the time to protect ourselves. So we live in a world, and let me just take a step back here. This is a little bit of a philosophy lesson for some of us. Has anyone ever heard of postmodernism here? At least in the philosophical way. So postmodernism is probably the most influential philosophy on your life today that you've probably never heard of or spent a lot of time thinking about. So this is how it works, is back in the day, you know, how did you know what was true? You knew what was true by listening to what the Pope said or by reading what the Bible said or asking maybe a religious leader or a community leader. That's how you knew what was true. And then starting in the Enlightenment in the 17th century and in different ways, the major shift that happened is now we know what's true when we use our own reason, or we use the sciences to figure stuff out. So it doesn't matter what the Bible said, or it doesn't matter what someone smart said. All that matters from now on is that you can understand it yourself using your own reason, or maybe the scientific method to get to one thing or another. So if I tell you that this is a round table, you would look at it and say, no, my reason tells me that it's a clear stand and you're wrong. So the way we determine what's true is by using our own reason and our own senses to be able to establish what's true. But now we live in a different period. A modern period was that we have this foundational belief and system of reason which we can figure out the world. Postmodernism says this. You know what? How about this? I get to decide what's true for me, and you get to decide what's true for you. There's really no such thing as truth. You may think that this is one thing, but how do I know the same light waves hitting my eyes or the same light waves hitting your eyes? And maybe we have different languages and different perspectives and different ways of describing things. So how about this? You just say what's true for you, and I'll just say what's true for me. That's kind of the world that we often live in these days, in my opinion, because everyone's in charge of figuring out their own reality. This is my personal theory. One of the reasons why I think tattoos are so important these days and why everyone gets tattoos younger and younger is because we're running out of ways to decide who we want to be. And rather than having someone else tell us, we just put on our bodies our own identity of who we feel we want to be. Rather than saying, I am this because this is who God says I am, I'm defined by what clothes I wear and the tattoos I have and the haircuts I get. And by the way, I've had at least 50 comments this morning that I got a haircut. I know. I think it's okay. This is what's tough, though. You know, whenever we watch the news, the way we used to watch the news in a modern time was you would watch the news to find out what's true or what's really happening in the world. But nowadays we live in a postmodern world, which means that when we watch the news, all we're really doing is reinforcing our own beliefs about what we already believe about the world. So you watch whatever news station tells you the news that you want to hear so that you can believe that all your beliefs are true. And that's the way we live in the world now. The news stations don't say the same thing. They just give their own perspective on their view of the world, because there's no view that matters for everyone anymore. It's everyone's own view. In fact, postmodernists say that anytime you claim something's true, all it really is an assertion of power. There's no such thing as truth anymore. So we actually live in a culture where the idea of truth itself doesn't exist very easily. That's a hard thing to think about. You know, we live in a world that is far more gray than black and white, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, because truth truly is complex and evasive, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. One of the things I would encourage you to think about is, would you consider yourself a truthful person who seeks the truth? That's a far more difficult thing than you can ever imagine, because the truth is a difficult thing to find. I knew a guy here at the church who seemed like the most perfect guy you could ever meet. He was like dressed nice every single week and was doing, a great job, and he would take you out in his fancy car and nice meals and really have engaging conversations. And then his fiance at the time, one day came to me in tears because she said, "Everything's a lie. Everything about this guy is a lie." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "He doesn't have any money. He doesn't even live here. That's not even his name." And she goes online and she found out all this stuff about him in like all these different ways, where she found out that the person that she thought he is was totally not who he was. That's not the only time I've experienced that in this church. I've met lots of people who ended up not being who we thought that they were. You know what I'm talking about, right? Right now all of you are looking at each other like, I know that guy. You know what I mean? And that's okay. Is your truth built on a lie or not? One of my favorite Bible parables that Jesus tells, or stories that he gives, is he invites all of us to build our house and our life on a rock instead of sand. Anytime you build any part of who you are on a lie, something fake in your resume, something not true about you, maybe a way you present yourself that isn't real, anytime you do that, what you're doing is you're building your life on sand. And Jesus tells us that if you build your life on sand, all that happens is a wave comes along at some point, and it just takes everything out with it like a hurricane. But if you build your house on a rock, it's like building your house on the truth. When a storm comes, you stand. When a storm comes, you're ready to withstand it because you're built on something that's strong. The truth is, at the end of the day, the only thing that will sustain you through difficult times. Lies come and go. But the truth is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Henry Cloud, who's one of my favorite preachers, guys, he says this. He says that reality is your friend. Reality is your friend. A lot of folks that I know live in fake worlds. They live in fake mental worlds where they lie to themselves, they lie to other people, and it's only a matter of time until everything comes crashing down. But for those of us that are truly ready to become truth tellers, reality is something we're ready to reckon with. Reality is something that we're ready to wrestle with and get to know a little bit better. One of my favorite books, Good to Great, on leadership and about different organizations, it says, good to great companies, the ones that are sustained and the best over the long course of history, good to great companies are the ones that, quote, confront the brutal facts of your current reality. So whether you're a company, an individual, or anything else, the only way you're going to be able to withstand the world and the pressures of it is to deal with what's true and not with what's a lie. It's so easy to present yourself in a fake way. It's so easy to hide from the things that you hear out there, or maybe even in your own head. But this commandment is an invitation to build a life that's built on a rock. So I'll end with this. 3 different lies that I think we tell ourselves over and over. And this may apply to you or maybe not, but I'm hoping that maybe you'll hear God's word in some of this. One lie that I hear all the time whenever I talk to people is this one. I'm okay. I'm okay. Lamentations 3 says, let us examine our ways and test them, and then let us return to the Lord. A lot of folks that I meet, I'll ask them, how they're doing, or I'll see them even in the middle of a crisis. They're like, oh, I'm okay. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'm doing just fine. And whenever I see those folks, they remind me of those horses that are race horses that have those blinders on their eyes so that they can't see all the things around them. And they're just focused on their own little fake built-up reality. I know a guy one time that had so many bills coming from collectors They were calling him 100 times a day, trying to get money out of this guy. And I would see him all the time eating out at nice restaurants, just spending more and more and more money. I don't know if you know anyone like that, but I sure do. And every time I would say him, I'd be like, man, when are you going to be ready to deal with reality here? You can't keep putting this thing off forever. Because the longer you put it off, the worse it's going to get. Did you know that it's okay not to be okay? It's okay to admit when you're not okay. Welcome to the club of being not okay. It's called a church. The church is supposed to be a place where you're able to say, hey, I'm not doing okay today, or I need some help with this. One of the foundational steps of a relationship with God is a confession of sin. And a confession of sin is like a technical, weird word that maybe doesn't make sense, but all it is it's a precious moment where you acknowledge what's really real in your life, which is that I need help. In AA and different recovery groups and 12-step groups, what's one of the first things you have to do in order to find recovery? Is you have to admit that your life is out of control. That moment where you admit that you're not okay is often the most powerful moment you'll ever have in your entire life. So many of us live without the truth and contend that we're just doing fine and everything's going to be fine and I don't want to deal with that today. But if you're ready to tell the truth more to yourself today than you ever have, be okay with saying it's not okay. Second lie I often hear is this: no one will find out. No one will find out. I actually sometimes these days feel bad for politicians because if you become a politician, your whole life gets reviewed. You know, people are digging into your past and hiring private investigators to dig through your internet history, to dig through your whole life, everything they could possibly find. I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, that's just too much scrutiny that I don't think almost anyone can stand up to if they're honest with themselves. It's a terrible thing. I know this about sin, and Jesus told it to us pretty clear, is that sin and darkness love one another. Sin and darkness love one another. No one, or at least rarely, never, does anyone say, hey, you know what, I'm going to do this evil thing and I want everyone to see it. Sin is always done in quiet, where no one's looking, with, picking up all the traces behind you so that no one can follow you along the way. Jesus says, hey, are you interested in the light? Are you interested in a life where you're okay letting people see stuff? You know, one of the lies I often hear is that I'll never get caught until it happens and it's too late. Whatever you're doing now, where you're lying to yourself that you're going to be able to get away with whatever it is, know two things. That one, you probably won't, and two, God already knows. God already knows. So my encouragement to you is don't be afraid of the truth because it's the one thing that will set you free. Whatever's in your past that you don't want anyone to find out about, let today be a day where you stop telling lies about that to yourself. And you just say, God, not only am I not okay, but I don't want this to define my life. I need a fresh start and I need to move on. The last lie I often hear is this, is that I can do that tomorrow. I can do that tomorrow. Whatever my issue is in my relationship or my marriage or my thing with my kids or that thing at work or whatever that is, you know what, I'm just going to deal with all that tomorrow. I don't want to deal with that today. And we lie to ourselves. We lie to ourselves thinking, all right, you know what, I'm just going to put my blinders on and I don't want to deal with that and I'm just going to let that thing, whatever it is, sit over there and I'm going to pretend like it doesn't affect me and it doesn't impact me and that there's nothing I can do about it and I don't want to deal with it. I've been like that many times in my life with a lot of things, and every time I do that, what I really am doing is setting myself up for an even greater failure, because here's how sin and lying works, is it opens a little crack. You know, the Grand Canyon started with just a trickle of a river coming down over a bunch of rocks. And a lie is like that. A lie comes really slow and wiggles its way in, and Satan says, did God really say that? And that's how sin works, and that's how a lie works. But then what happens is the lie keeps coming, and the water keeps pulling it along until eventually, over time, in your life and in mine, a Grand Canyon opens up so big that you no longer even imagine a world where you could get back to the other side and close that gap. That's how lying works. When your whole life is built on a lie, eventually you get to a point where it's impossible to go back. Or you feel that way, right? Like, what if I actually told the truth about this? And then you have to just shut down again because you see the other side miles away and there's no way you could jump it anymore. And you're afraid of what it would look like. So this is how we'll end today. For those of you and me who are afraid of telling the truth, of what that would even look like in our lives or to God, maybe a sin that we haven't confessed or something that's in our life that's eating at us. You should know this about the God of the Bible, is that Grand Canyon, that big gap is real, and that we've created it, and that sin has made it so that the distance between us and God is enormous, so big that we could never, ever hurdle it or get across. And so in an impossible situation, what can be done? Well, the Bible tells us this. We know what happens next. It's that the God of the universe said, that impossible gap, I'm going to close myself. And what Jesus did on the cross is he laid down and he grew himself out on the cross, and he laid down from one edge of the Grand Canyon all the way to the other, so that from now on there is a bridge that's been built between us and God. That whatever lies or things we've held in our heart our whole lives, from now on all we have to do is say, God, I am ready to close the gap between us, and I don't know how to get from my side to your side. And God says, you don't have to worry about that. I've closed the gap for you already. I love you. When you're ready to tell the truth, I'm ready to tell you what's even more true. You think your sin is true, but I'll tell you what's even more true, is that sin is forgiven. That I've died for that. That my love for you is bigger than you could ever imagine. People that don't tell the truth are often afraid to do so because they think that their life has to be good in order to be respected or loved. You and I don't have to be good people. We don't have to be perfect people. God calls us to be honest people. God calls us to be truth tellers, people that are ready to say, God, I have messed up. I failed. I'm not good at this, but I'm okay telling the truth because I know that my goodness and my worth is not based in a fake reality that I present, but instead in a God who says he loves me no matter what. It's a crazy idea. The foundation of my life is built on a truth that's not me. If my truth was my life, I would be empty and void and not know where it's going. But my truth in my life is based in a God who says that he loves me more than I could ever know. And because of that, I have the encouragement and stability to tell the truth to him. Are you ready to tell the truth to yourself and to God? Let's just take a minute to pray. Let's bow our heads. Lord, we come before you, not sure if we're ready for the truth or what that would even mean. We pray that you would give us the courage to be able to live more deeply into what's true, which is you. Thank you for closing the gaps. When we tell the truth and it hurts and we have to deal with reality, be there to catch us. We trust you. Give us courage, we pray, in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.